This is a weird story as well. Let me tell you the backstory on this. Like maybe a month, maybe 2 months ago, a friend of mine sent me a paper that was published in a research journal, specifically like a Christian research journal. And I saw the headline and I'm like, well, this is not going to be a good paper. And I skimmed through it and I'm like, there's a lot going on here. And I feel like if I'm supposed to debunk this, I don't know if I want to read through this lengthy paper with a lot of jargon. I don't do research. So a lot of this is meant, it's above my head, right? And then, like a month later, I began to see actual articles written about this paper and how wrong it was. And I'm like, let me give that another shot. Let me look at that paper again. And I realized, wait a minute, this isn't as jargon filled as I thought. Someone like me can actually debunk this pretty easily. I don't even need to try that hard. And I want to share this with all of you now as well, because I'm going to show you the title of the paper. And when I show you the title of the paper, you're going to be like, uh-oh, this cannot be good. Here is the title of the paper. Here you go. Rape, Suicide, and the Rise of Religious Nuns. Okay, you're going to try to link these together. And this is written by Philip Truscott of Southwest Baptist University in Missouri. So this dude, this professor at a Christian college, this researcher, is trying to show you there is a link between those three areas. And again, I mean, instinctively, no, there isn't. So what's he going to do? This was published, by the way, in something called the Journal of Sociology and Christianity, which is a Christian journal. And here's what this dude tried to do. He wanted to find a link between those three things I just mentioned. The problem is you don't actually get really good data at like a granular level about, religious demographics and sexual assault numbers and rates of suicide, things like that. So he tried getting state level numbers so that he could try and compare and contrast and do all that stuff. And his argument is that, well, if you look at the rates of sexual assault reporting and self-proclaimed nuns, non-religious people, well, the graphs look kind of similar. And therefore, I'm going to go ahead and draw a conclusion. He argues basically that a rise in non-religiosity has led to a loss of self-control, and that atheism is therefore, and he said this in the paper, a plausible mechanism driving both increased rape and suicide. He says atheism is a mechanism for more of those two things. He doesn't say being an atheist causes it. He just says, these graphs all point in the same direction, and isn't that very interesting? And if you've ever taken a basic statistics course, like, what do you learn on day one? Correlation is not causation. Correlation does not imply causation. Just because the graphs look similar and they're trending in the same way doesn't mean one thing caused the other. But this is basically what the guy does. Here's an example of what I'm talking about right here. Look at this graph that is included in his paper. This is the national rape reporting rate and the national non-affiliation rate by year. And look at the graphs. You can practically put them on top of each other. And isn't that strange? And then he looks at the national suicide rates mixed with the same thing. Here is that graph. I mean, those aren't even really similar, but you could see there was like a peak in 2018. And he's like, well, those are going in the same direction as well. And that's pretty much how this whole paper goes. Like, I'm not getting more granular than that because this guy doesn't get more granular than that. It's just a question of where's he getting his data from. But the fact is, he doesn't really have anything linking the two. So he's just cherry picking numbers wherever he can get them. Now, Religion News Service interviewed this guy about this paper. And this is interesting. What did he say about it? While he falls short of claiming that loss of religion causes more suicides and assault, Truscott has subsequently argued that his findings prove the need for more state vouchers for private schools, most of which are religious. families that choose religious schools for their kids can play a role in reversing the decline of religion in America, which he argues will reduce the rate of suicide and campus sexual assaults. So this dude is like, I'm so right about this that we should have more money for private schools. So that's disturbing. I think some of you were saying this in the comments, but this is a fair point as well. One of the ways this guy got information about sexual assault is by using information provided to the government from college campuses. It's part of something called the Clary Act, and that is a proxy for assault allegations, but it never occurs to this guy that maybe campuses that have more religious diversity, because they are larger for a bunch of reasons, and they also are the same schools that probably have less organized religion, and that they also might be the same campuses where sexual assault is taken more seriously, which means more students can report it knowing their experiences will not be dismissed. On the flip side here, what about all the stories we have heard from very Christian campuses where a lot of women on those campuses know that if they come forward with stories about how they were allegedly assaulted, that might mean admitting they broke school rules regarding sex before marriage, or that maybe they got drunk, or maybe they stayed out past curfew. And so they have internalized the fact that if something happens to you, you do not report that stuff. I think I mentioned this the other week, but like there was an article written years ago where they basically summed it up this way. How do you report sexual assault at a place where authorities seem skeptical such a thing even exists? So at some level, if there are more reports of sexual assault, that's partly because new policies have made it a bit easier for victims to come forward, including at religious schools. But without any actual data linking religiosity with sexual assault, you would not say one causes, the former causes the latter, right? That would make no sense whatsoever. The funny thing is, I think this guy gets that too, because in this paper he wrote, I want to show you this. He actually said, where is the part I am looking for? Yes, right here. Check out this thing he wrote in the paper. Since more religious states might attach a greater social stigma to sexual behavior, victim blaming and correspondingly lower reporting rates might be the reason for lower apparent crime rates. Like, dude, you nailed it. You figured it out. That red states might not have higher crime rates because they've told women they should not be reporting this stuff. He says that in the paper, he admits it, and then he just continues on saying the opposite. Like that thought never crosses his mind. So one of the other things here that is mentioned in this paper is that this dude cherry picks facts to support a conclusion. He never considers all the possible reasons that certain numbers are moving in the same direction. It never occurs to him that a decline in organized religion and maybe a rise in certain types of violence might be caused by separate factors entirely. Sometimes he just blames atheists for no reason whatsoever. What is one thing? This is an interesting thing he said that I wanted to show you. He wanted to talk about alcohol. Where is this? Increased. Oh no, where did this part go? There we go. Look at this part that he cites right here. If I can, there we go. A plausible mediator between religious non-affiliation and rape is increased drug and alcohol use. As noted above, the non-religious are associated with increased drinking and illegal drug use. So and the increasing state-by-state trend toward recreational marijuana legalization may have accelerated this trend. As self-intoxication is often presented as a victimless crime, it is easy to believe atheists and agnostics feel free to partake once the element of religious self-regulation is removed. So because we don't have any morals, I guess, we might do pot and we might drink, and therefore ... rape happens. What the hell? This guy is just concluding things out of nowhere. Look at the last line in this paragraph. To put it another way, some non-religious men made a short moral step into substance use and then, in a diminished state of self-control, made a much larger one into criminality. However, he wants you to know he's totally not saying atheism causes this horrible stuff. It's such a bad paper, and this got published. So, in that Religion News Service article, to their credit, they spoke with critics of all of this. They spoke to actual sociologists who understand this stuff. Like one sociologist, Ryan Cragen, he said that the paper ignores how states with higher murder rates are also correlated to higher per capita populations of evangelicals. And he actually quoted, Ryan Cragen said this, if I were to use this dude's logic, then I should be able to argue that evangelicals are more likely to kill people. But he wouldn't say that because that's not what the data shows. But if you want to play the correlation game, yeah, more guns, more evangelicals, those go together. I want to show you another thing here. If you haven't seen this before, I've sometimes given talks and I've used this in my talks. But another sociologist, Phil Zuckerman, has said this about atheism and morality. Look at this from an article in Salon, rather. In terms of who supports helping refugees, affordable health care for all, accurate sex education, death with dignity, gay rights, trans rights, animal rights, and as to who opposes militarism, the government use of torture, the death penalty, corporal punishment, and so on, the correlation remains. The most secular Americans exhibit the most care for the suffering of others, while the most religious exhibit the highest levels of indifference. Like, we are the moral ones. He also says this in the piece, when it comes to the most pressing moral issues of the day, hardcore secularists exhibit much more empathy, compassion, and care for the well-being of others than the most ardently God-worshipping. Such a reality is necessary to expose, not simply in order to debunk the long-standing canard that religion is necessary for ethical living, that you need God to be good, but because such exposure renders all the more pressing the need for a more consciously secular citizenry, one that lives in reality, embraces science and empiricism, and supports sound policies, not prayer, as a way to make life better, safer, and more humane. Love the article. Wonderful point. But that's the thing. If you want to compare religiosity and morality, pick the moral issue and you will find atheists tend to be on the side that most people would consider to be the moral one, the one that gives rights to people, things like that. I asked Zuckerman about this, the paper, and one of the things he told me is, if it is true that secularization causes harm, then why don't we see the highest rates of rape and suicide in the highly secularized nations of Scandinavia, Estonia, Czech Republic, UK, Japan, etc.? Even if you look at Canada, he told me, the most secular province, British Columbia, does not have the highest crime rates. He told me the bottom line is that rape rates and suicide rates are caused by many, many factors: economic, cultural, political, psychological, historical, etc. And to pin any of that on secularization is absurd. There's one more thing to show you in that Religion News Service article. They broached all of this with Truscott, the guy who wrote that paper, and they're like, what if you're like wrong about your conclusions? Look at what this dude said about it all. In an interview, he claimed that if his research had linked greater incidents of suicide or sexual assault to more widespread religious beliefs, journals would have flocked to publish his study. The social science journals, they lean to the left politically, Truscott said. They're very anti-religious. That reminds me of the Stephen Colbert line, like reality has a well-known liberal bias. Like, dude, we already have the research that shows less religiosity, as I just showed you, leads to more morality. So, like, no, you would not be saying anything surprising. They would not have published your paper just because you came to that conclusion. That's not how papers work. Truscott said he's glad the paper is getting attention, even if it's negative attention, and hopes it leads to more study about the social implications of the decline of religion. To critics, he simply says, Prove that I'm wrong. Like, what researcher is like, I'm going to put out a whole bunch of BS and it's your responsibility to explain why I'm dumb. Meanwhile, I'm just going to keep putting out my stupid, misguided statements. Like, that's something you expect from Jerry Coyne and Richard Dawkins these days. That prove that I'm wrong. Why did you publish this study that is wrong? That's the bigger issue here. There's a reason this dude's paper was not published in actual publications, but he had to go to like a Christian fake journal to get it published. So just, I think I'll stop there. Just a horrible paper, but I appreciate all the sociologists coming out and debunking it. All right, what questions we got here? It has been a continuing trope in Christian circles for a very long time that non-Christians have inferior ethics and increased crime. It is one of the truly toxic aspects of Christianity. Absolutely true. That is a trope. I have heard it for so many years, the idea that you need God to be good, even though none of the data backs that up. And if you look at the United States, the most awful things tend to happen because of what the religious people in power are doing. If you see any article about how they are harming women who need abortions, if you see all the mass shootings that are happening everywhere, why is that happening? Because like white evangelicals in power don't care about any of it. And they refuse to follow the data and they just go along with it. Again, name the issue of morality and you will see that religious nuts tend to be the people making it continue. And then they blame us for not having morality. Like, absolutely insane. And this is why I would also argue Democrats in power have a responsibility. I don't need them to be atheists, but I need them to take charge of the moral majority argument. We are the moral ones. Doesn't matter what your religion is. We know what's good for the rest of the country. Don't let them get away with that talking point, because every time they do it, everything gets worse, and it's about to for a long time. How are rates of assault and suicide connected to his institutions after fleeing or being shunned? I mean, it's a fair point that he didn't get into in his paper. But again, if you look at religious subcultures, denominations, how many like documentaries have we seen in recent years where not cult members, but people who grew up in evangelical Christian circles said they were assaulted because of what they got out of purity culture, that they were victims of abuse because they just believed their pastor and they were told never to question that person. The whole Catholic Church. Like, what the hell? How many institutions have these awful things gotten worse because they were following religious rules and not, whatever the data showed? Where did this article come from? I think I already covered that in the article. But again, it was published in a journal for the Journal of Sociology and Christianity, which is a Christian journal.